What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with my first impressions of Stellar Blade, which I've been playing steadily since midnight on Thursday. And I think I'm about 13 hours into it and busily grinding away in all the various side quests in the main hub. But I think I've reached a perfect stopping point where I can take a breath, exhale, and declare, I think this game's an absolute blast. Does it have flaws? Sure. Is it on the level of one of my favorite games in recent years like Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3? Not really. But what it does have is style to spare, music I could listen to for days, an insanely sexy protagonist, and best of all, boss battles that are just so fucking epic. They're challenging, they're aggressive, and they really require you to be flexible with a variety of different game mechanics. And when those bosses inevitably go down, the game reaches these kind of insane, delirious cinematic heights that I found to be much more exhilarating and much more intense than most science fiction movies coming out of Hollywood. In the end, I feel like we should judge games on whether or not they're fun to play, and I feel like on that front, this game passes with flying colors. And best of all, it's a brand new intellectual property that could easily spawn multiple sequels, an animated film, you name it. So if you followed my channel for any stretch of time, you were probably sick to death of hearing me complain about the lack of new original franchises in film and television. Everything's an adaptation or a reimagining or a sequel or prequel to something that was great decades ago and now has fallen on hard times. But with Stellar Blade, while it's certainly taking inspiration from classic games like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta or more recent examples like Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, I think it totally stands on its own. But this is the first AAA game that I've played coming out of South Korea. The developer's named Shift Up, and I've heard a lot of people making favorable comparisons to another Korean game, The Lies of P, a game which I've avoided due to rumors about its utterly unforgiving parry mechanics, but I will check it out at some point. But I'm officially adding Shift Up to the list of gaming companies that have my loyalty and my curiosity moving forward, and that list would also include Larian Studios as well as From Software. And as somebody who's been blown away by a lot of recent movies and shows coming out of South Korea, I think we can now include gaming as an area where the future seems very bright in South Korea. And what's cool is how there's an overlap between the gaming world and the movie world. This game recruited a man by the name of Hee Chao Jang, who was one of the monster designers on Bong Joon-ho's 2006 movie, The Host. And I think this kind of cross-pollination between the two industries is something that we're going to see a lot more of in the future. But if you've not yet played it or watched the trailers or the behind the scenes or any of this stuff, what is Stellar Blade? Basically, the game features this horrible dystopian future where humanity is trying to reclaim Earth from all these terrible creatures who drove humanity into space many years ago. And out in space, they've continued to evolve in all sorts of surprising ways. But in this game, you control Eve, who, in addition to having a keen eye for fashion, is also capable of just beating the fuck out of people, who slowly but surely accumulates a variety of technological upgrades that allow for increasingly complex and sophisticated combo attacks. And I kind of had to unlearn what I'd learned from games like Elden Ring, because I'm more of like a dodge and counter player. But basically in this game, you've got to embrace the parry. You've got to lean into the parry. You've got to look forward to parrying your opponents as you savagely unleash all your various combinations. And this is going to sound a little ridiculous, but as you and the bosses are exchanging blows and you're hitting them and you're parrying their attacks and you're getting all these cool sound effects, if you're doing it right, the sound effects almost sound like a really elaborate percussion instrument. And then the big crescendo or the big climax of these exchanges is when you get to unleash this really killer finishing move at the end of this absolutely ruthless combat. And also, word of warning, as combat begins and as combat ends, pay attention to little prompts or warnings, because if you ignore those prompts and warnings, you're going to take additional damage, but also sometimes the fight will keep going because you missed the final finishing move to finishing off your boss. But these boss battles are what the game is all about. If you were to compare the boss battles to the exploration or to the voice acting or to the story, none of that stuff's remotely as interesting as the really kick-ass over-the-top boss battles. But I kind of struggled initially because I was trying to avoid learning all these new moves in favor of my typical dodge and counter approach like I use in Elden Ring. But that's just not going to cut it in this game. Early on, there's a move called Blink. And I was like, all right, fuck Blink. I don't want to do Blink. And I decided I was just, not going to learn how to do Blink properly until I got to this boss called Corruptor or the Corruptor. And the Corruptor was just beating my ass over and over and over again. And he kept giving me these visual prompts or clues that it was time for me to blink. And instead I tried to dodge and he'd hit me or he'd poison me or whatever. So I went into the in-game tutorial, basically inside the skill tree. Any new move that you learn, you can go into a tutorial just for that move, and I just practiced Blink blink, blink. And my timing was I was trying to blink too quickly as opposed to waiting for the moment where you blink through your opponent and backstab him. And it's fucking awesome. In any event, after practicing my blinks for a while, I went back to see Corruptor and I beat him to death. So every boss in this game, it's like a little dance. And when you learn the dance, the boss will die. But there's no way to discuss Stellar Blade without acknowledging and reacting to the recent moral panic over this game in some quarters. And without pointing any fingers to any particular journalists or publications, I'll just say that there are a lot of people out there who just cannot accept the idea of a sexualized central character where watching her descend down ladders or climbing up a rope becomes one of the features that's very exciting and provocative within the game. So somebody please hold out their arms and catch these journalists as they faint from shock, because clearly they've never played any classic games like Metroid or Mass Effect. Like I was, I think 11 years old when I was playing Metroid with one of my friends, and we were kind of passing the controller back and forth, and we've been struggling to kill the Mother Brain. He finally killed the Mother Brain, and as he escaped out of the zone, we were just like, swapping these high fives, and we were swapping so many high fives we almost failed to notice as Samus Aran transformed into the lovely lady that was concealed beneath all of her armor, and we were like, whoa, oh my god. And then as we got to play the game through a second time, the armor was gone and she had this kind of cool, stylish outfit. And so that was my first encounter with being like attracted to a central character. Admittedly, I was 11. My taste in girls was a little vanilla at that point. But the first game that I played that really successfully combined science fiction and sex appeal was Mass Effect. And I didn't even know there was nudity or sex in the game. I was just playing it because it was I think it's a BioWare game, and I'd loved Knights of the Old Republic, and it just seemed like an upgrade over Knights of the Old Republic. So I was playing that game through as Shepard, and I usually play my games as a beautiful protagonist if that is an option. But I befriended this blue alien chick. I think her name is Laria. Is it something like Laria? In any event, I was playing the game, we were getting along, and I'd been developing my relationship with her. But then suddenly, toward the end of the game, I must have said the right thing, but suddenly this wild, I guess kind of chase, but at the time, seemed like a pretty wild sex scene unfolded. I was like, whoa! Like, I had no idea that was tucked away inside the game. And don't even get me started on Baldur's Gate 3, where let's just say, no matter what your sexual preferences might be, that game will find a way to keep you busy for a very, very long time. And while it wasn't the only attraction of Baldur's Gate 3, it was definitely a major attraction. Whether you're in love with Karlach or Shadowheart or whomever, those relationships give that game additional emotion, but it also just makes it a game for adults. It's a game with an adult sensibility, and I feel like for people who want to try to remove sex from video games, it's like, go play Super Mario Brothers. Like, you don't have to worry about any sort of sex appeal there whatsoever. Like, Nintendo is very innocent, very chaste. Go play Legend of Zelda, all that stuff. But there needs to be room in the gaming space, in the gaming landscape, where people are allowed to combine fantasy and sex or sci-fi and sex or whatever the case might be. And getting back to Mass Effect, I can vividly recall playing Mass Effect 1, loving it, Mass Effect 2, really loving it, Mass Effect 3, really loving it. And then suddenly Mass Effect Andromeda came along, where I could tell they were trying to reverse this whole trend of the sexualization of characters, and they were like quite literally deliberately and willfully making them seem very plain and very ordinary. And that is the only Mass Effect game that I've played that I did not finish. But this is all just a very long-winded way of saying that I have absolutely no problem with Shift Up's creative decision on this front. Let me give you an example from the game that's not sexual, but it is beautiful and it's very immersive. Early on in the game, right as you're getting started on your first tutorial mission, a character named Taki rips you out of this pod, frees you, gives you a few instructions, tells you, like, this is the mission, let's go kick some butt. But the way she rescued me and pulled me out of this pod, and the way the music swelled, and like the imagery got so beautiful, and it was just so exhilarating and so intoxicating. I remember at the time thinking, why can't movies or shows be as immersive and as exciting and just this visually arresting? I was just floored by the experience, and I'm going to keep coming back to it. The music in this game is just awe-inspiring. I can have the music playing in the background just fine. Like, you could use it as like ASMR to like fall asleep or to meditate or like hang out like in an isolation tank or whatever. But the music here gets high marks. And what I love is that when you stop at a campsite, the track changes just to give you some variety, and there's a little record player there, and you can skip through tracks as you want, if you want, and then you go to other zones and you get other songs. But anyway, the music alongside the boss battles and alongside the beauty of the character of Eve, these are all major feature attractions for this game. But I feel like I've been going quite a bit at this point without offering any criticisms of the game, so let's slow down and call attention to a few flaws. Let's start with the dialogue. While there are scenes like that scene where I got rescued from that little pod where I was like, oh my God, you lead, I'll follow, let's go kill some fucking monsters. Like, those scenes are incredible, and they're very cinematic, and they're very exhilarating, and they just sucked me right in. But there are also some really long, lame dialogue scenes in this game where I was like, please tell me the button that I can press where I can skip through all this bullshit, where I was bored out of my goddamn mind, where just the voice acting and the writing, it could be a matter of like translating things from Korean to English, but I don't think so. I think just there are some boring exposition dumps that have absolutely no bearing on whether or not you're going to be able to complete a quest. Like if you're trying to complete a quest or a side quest or whatever, you just go to the quest, it tells you what you're doing. I just feel like, yeah, anytime you're playing a game, especially if you're going to play it through a second or third time on New Game Plus or hard mode, you should be able to skip all that bullshit. So that was definitely disappointing. As far as level design goes, I'd say most of the levels are pretty goddamn cool. Like I said, you're exploring this dystopian technological hellscape filled with all sorts of beasties and monstrosities. And they're like in any From Software game or Souls-like game, there are a lot of shortcuts which allow you to kind of go back and re-explore zones. And you have this little scanner that allows you to look for secret items and secret monsters. And definitely scan the shit out of every environment, because the more upgrades you find, the faster you'll be able to upgrade your gear, make new outfits, whatever the case might be. So you're definitely rewarded for exploration, but none of these zones really seem to offer enough flexibility, at least early on, where if you wanted to like skip certain zones and go right to the hard stuff, like that's one of the big parts that makes a game like Dark Souls so appealing, is that you've got like 5 or 6 different options initially in terms of how aggressively do you wish to play the game. And it just means that every time you play the game, you can play it a little differently. It keeps it fresh. But once you get to the main central hub of the game, your options do open up. Like, all right, let's go kill some time for a while fishing or whatever the case might be before getting back to the central quest. But you do need to get through like the first few bosses before the game kind of opens up for you. But another feature to these zones are these little puzzles you have to solve in order to progress. And some of these puzzles are simpler than others. Like you need to like take over a crane device to like build a bridge or whatever the case might be. But some of these puzzles are just annoying as hell. Like you find a crate, you're trying to open it and get some gear, and it's like, no, like give me the code. And I don't mind a code if it's like, oh, walk 100 feet over here, find the dead body, kill the boss, come back, use the code. But it's like, unless the puzzles are really exciting gameplay, I'm not really that interested in them. So I found the puzzles after a while to just be very tedious and very annoying, as opposed to like, oh, how exciting, I get to solve another puzzle. And I feel like if you're going to put puzzles in games, make those puzzles really fun, because otherwise I just want to get back to fighting the bosses, because like I said before, that's where the game is most exhilarating and most exciting. But my last complaint I haven't experienced firsthand, but I have heard it in the reviews from Fextra Life and Fightin' Cowboy. If you want to get a full comprehensive review where the game's been completely cleared with the multiple endings and they're playing hard mode and that sort of thing, I recommend both of their videos. They did an absolutely fantastic job. But right now, prior to the arrival of the new DLC that they're working on, there's no New Game Plus. When you get to the end of the game and you start over, you're starting over from scratch. It's a harder difficulty setting, but you have none of your gear, none of your upgrades, nothing. And I know for a lot of people, whether you're playing a game like Bloodborne or, Elden Ring or whatever, when you get to the end of the game, you're in love with your character, you're in love with your build, and you want to keep playing. Right now, that is not an option, but apparently when the DLC comes, that will be included. But when that new DLC might arrive, I do not know. So in conclusion, I'll just say I don't think this game's on the level of like the best of From Software, but it can definitely hang in there with other Souls-like games like Lords of the Fallen, which came out last year. I know some people didn't like it. I really enjoyed it. I played it all the way through, played some New Game Plus as well. It's probably at that level or better, and every Souls-like game out there has got its own little bells and whistles or its own little, distinguishing characteristics which set it apart. And here, obviously, one of the main feature attractions is you get to be the hottest fucking girl humanly possible. And I was reading an interview on Wikipedia with the main developer. Hang on, I'll just read the quote in full. The game's director, Hyung Tae Kim, has defended these design choices by explaining that from a third-person perspective, the player's view is predominantly directed at the back of the character. Yeah, totally fair. Hence the emphasis on making this view appealing. Yeah, when you're playing Dark Souls, or you're playing Elden Ring, or you're playing Bloodborne, or you're playing Sekiro, 99.9% of the time, you're watching your player run from behind and fight. So they gotta look totally badass. Like, And dress up sounds silly and it sounds ridiculous, but when you get into these games, dress up does become a huge part of it. And if your character looks like a bad motherfucker or really cool or really sexy, it makes the game more enjoyable. It's like some of the comments I've heard by Brian De Palma when he's talking about some of the horror films and slasher films that he's made. He just finds it more interesting. If you're watching a haunted house and somebody's walking through with a candelabra, it's more interesting if it's a beautiful girl like in a diaphanous gown as opposed to like some middle-aged dude. And like, you know, obviously your taste may vary, your mileage may vary, but I think we can all agree Eve is a strikingly beautiful character, and she is one hell of a protagonist. And I've enjoyed every single second so far running around, beating the crap out of people with her increasingly sophisticated and elaborate kind of bag of tricks that she can pull from for killing the baddies. And I'm reminded of a comment recently in one of my videos where somebody said, will you please stop talking about sex so much in your videos? It's kind of cringe. But sex is a part of entertainment. Sex appeal has always been a part of movies. Sex appeal has always been a part of books. Sex appeal is also a part of video games. And if you don't like it, don't watch those movies, don't read those books, don't play those games. But I am going to acknowledge sex appeal when it's a huge part of a game. But if we want to talk about cringe and cringe factor, I think there's nothing more cringy than when somebody uses the word cringe to try to shut down a conversation. Oh, I don't approve of this. I don't like this. So I'm just going to label it as cringe so you're not allowed to discuss anymore. Like, fuck off. I'm going to talk about whatever the hell I want. But in that this channel is primarily concerned with movie culture and movie reviews and that sort of thing, I'll just close with, I think Hollywood could learn a lot from this game. And South Korea, obviously, when it comes to creating entertainment, they know what the fuck they're doing, which is why like Netflix keeps acquiring and developing all these Korean shows and that sort of thing. And I think, Korean gaming is about to level up in a big way. And I think that's awesome. Like the decentralization of entertainment is a wonderful, beautiful thing because like in a very competitive environment, well, then you need to make the best goddamn game you possibly can or the best goddamn movie you possibly can. Like take a movie like The Creator. In comparison to Stellar Blade, The Creator is so bland and so boring and so lifeless. Like I wish every person out there making a science fiction show or movie right now would just be required to at least watch like the cinematics of this game. Like, oh, you're allowed to tell stories in a very vibrant, exciting, intoxicating way, and our movies and shows taste like cardboard. And the beautiful thing about competition is whether you're talking about movie studios or gaming developers or whatever, if somebody decides we are not going to have sex in our games or we're not going to have violence in our movies, well then in a competitive environment, guess what? Somebody else is going to say, oh, well, that's a market opportunity. I'm going to create a game or a movie or a novel or whatever that leans all the way in on these qualities that you find so verboten and so scandalous and blah, blah, blah. And hence, games like Stellar Blade come into this world with much fanfare. So I hope that people will play the game. I hope people will give it a shot. At a minimum, it's going to be a little bit of a cultural lightning rod for a little while, but that cultural lightning rod is why I'm even aware of the game. When I saw people freaking out over the trailer and the main character, I was like, what the fuck's going on here? But then when I started hearing about, oh, it's a Souls-like game and gameplay, it's got a heavy focus on gameplay and challenging gameplay at that. It's like, all right, there's something going on here that's worthy of additional scrutiny and investigation. So I am thrilled that I took it for a test drive. I will continue playing it all the way through. Can't wait to experiment and play dress up with all the various outfits, and I can't wait to beat the crap out of more bosses. Am I going to regard it as a game on the level of one of my recent favorites, whether that's Dark Souls 1, 3, Elden Ring, or a strategy game or turn-based game like Baldur's Gate 3. No, it's not at that level of like all-time great classic games that are just going to make me like, obsessed for all time. But I am enjoying the shit out of it, and that is enough. So on that note, I'm going to wrap this video up. Hope you enjoyed my reaction. Please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. But I hope everybody's having a great weekend, and more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.